Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar in Generative AI in Academia, Insights from Gothenburg University. My name is Eva Kuraki. I'm a partner manager at AI Sweden, and today I will be guiding you to our webinar. But before we go through this event, I would like to give a short introduction about AI Sweden and our organization. AI Sweden is a national center for accelerating the use of AI for the benefit of our society, our competitiveness, and for everyone living in Sweden. We are a national center for applied AI. We are a neutral arena, non-profit and broadly funded by the government via Vinnova and partly from our partners. They are private, public, and academia. Here you can see all our partners that are more than 120 at the moment. They range from the public sector, academia, private sector, corporate, and SMEs and startups. Our motto is invest together and share with many. Now I would like to move to the agenda of the webinar today. As we said, this event is co-hosted by AI Sweden and our partner, University of Gothenburg. And today with us, we will have three presenters from Gothenburg University. Let me introduce them. The first one is Miroslav Staron. He is professor in software engineering and pro-dean at the IT faculty of University of Gothenburg. He is going to give a presentation about an approach to generative AI in education. Then we will welcome Johan Lundin. Johan Lundin is professor at the Department of Applied AI at the University of Gothenburg, and he will present how AI affects higher education and will deep into the need for new competence and skills. Last but not least, we will welcome Matthias von Feiligen, pedagogical developer at the Department of Applied AI IT at University of Gothenburg. Matthias will give a presentation about AI and educational aspects. He will present how generative AI affects teaching and assessment. After the first part of our webinar with the presentations, we will move to a panel discussion and we will pose questions that you will write on our chat. This part of the webinar, it will be my colleague, Raquel Broman, head of competence, that will moderate. So, it's time to start with the presentations, and I would like to welcome on stage Miroslav Staron. Miroslav Staron is a professor in software engineering and pro-dean at the IT faculty, at the University of Gothenburg. So the floor is yours, and we are keen to learn more about your presentation.
Thank you, Eva. And I'm very excited to be here and talk about our policy for generative AI for education. So, the first of all, I would like to start with three main key takeaways from this presentation. So, first of all, already in 2023, when we decided to work with policy, we all recognized at the Education Board of the university that generative AI is here to stay. It is not a threat to us, but it opens up new possibilities, both in pedagogy and also in learning for students. And I think that after this seminar, you will realize how important it is to embrace this kind of technology from the educational side. The second takeaway is the question of generative AI as a societal class question, the access to generative AI, not only in terms of the technology itself, but also in terms of language, in terms of domain-specific applications, and also the skills that the students will have. Jensen Huang, who is the CEO of NVIDIA, in his talk at some point of time at Stanford, mentioned that we shouldn't be afraid of AI taking our jobs. We should be afraid of someone with AI to take our jobs. And I think that with our policy and with our approach at university, we try to equip our students with the skills that they can actually be relevant on the job market and in the society for many years to come. And I think that's the very important three takeaway that will lead me to the next question. So, University of Gothenburg. Why is it so important to have a policy that is central for the university? To understand how we actually reasoned about artificial intelligence and generative artificial intelligence, I want to bring up the organization chart of us. So we are a university that has about 7,000 employees and 50,000 students. Now, not having a policy for generative AI is probably something out of the question, because if we do, we would have 57,000 different policies. Everybody would understand generative AI in different ways. Now, because we have 57,000 people all in all, we cannot have one person, vice chancellor or deputy vice chancellor or the board, to come up and say what is allowed and what is not allowed. We have to find the golden middle. And that golden middle means that somewhere at the university central level, we have to provide guidance for the teachers and for researchers and for students how to work with generative AI. Because for our university, we cannot say that it's allowed or it's forbidden to use AI. For certain areas, for example, computer science, using AI is a daily bread for researchers and students. Whereas for some other parts like journalism or arts, that may be a threat. And of course, pedagogical approaches for any of those areas would differ very much. So what we decided at the university already in early 2023, that has to be taken in the context that that was just a few months after ChatGPT was released. It was generally quite panicky in the higher education world. What do we do with that? It was a lot of discussions about cheating, about examinations, about different forms. So at the educational board, where we have all the faculties, all the science departments represented, we started to ask ourselves the question, so should we really have a policy? If we want to have a policy, at which level? Should it be central? Should the rector decide what we want to do and how we want to do? Or should the board of the university say that everybody has to decide, can decide, the department, the program, the course, maybe even the faculty? We also started to discuss questions, should we forbid or encourage or allow, or maybe we should just stay ambivalent to the question of generative AI? We started to discuss what we want to achieve with that development. From the very beginning, we knew that this is not the development that is going to go away. We also knew that this is not the question of stopping. We knew that this is a question that we need to embrace. And that also led us to discussions around the problem of how does it really impact our university? What do we need to change? For example, if suddenly every course out of our over 2,000 courses changes the examination form from home exams to, for example, lecture halls, do we have enough lecture halls? Do we have enough licenses? We also started to ask ourselves the question, what kind of support should we provide to our teachers and students? The license of ChatGPT at that point of time cost about 200 Swedish crowns. If we just take the rough calculations, that would cost us about 20 million Swedish crowns per month for licenses for that. That's way too much cost, way too much resources that would go into one single software. So we started to put together a specific task force from the educational board. We decided that we need to have a representation of a few different disciplines. Of course, we needed to have somebody from the legal department, from the law, from the disciplinary committee. We needed to have someone from the IT and science to take a look at what kind of technology really exists and what can we do, what we cannot do with that technology. We wanted to have experts from our pedagogical unit that is responsible for the pedagogical development at the university. We wanted to understand how we should embrace that when it comes to pedagogy, what changes in the way we teach courses, what changes in the way students learn with and without the generative AI. And of course, we wanted to have someone from social sciences who would provide us the broader societal perspective. Where in this generative AI train should we be? Should we be on the leading edge, or should we just follow somebody else? And we started our work by looking at the existing policies. And mind you that it's 2023 at the very beginning, so we only found 2 policies at different universities. I'm not going to say which universities they are. Our colleagues are very proud of those policies, but they were just too far away from what we wanted to achieve. Then we look at the policies and existing discussions at the programs and departments at our university. What kind of questions, what kind of issues, what kind of delimitations different teachers and programs and departments want to put on the generative AI as a tool. And then, of course, we also look at the disciplinary cases that already started to pop up in 2023, where we wanted to see what is it that we actually catch and how do we reason in the disciplinary committee when it comes to generative AI. And as an output of that, we actually defined a policy that was translated into 2 parts. Our general policy, which we started with, was a policy for teachers on using generative AI in education. First of all, we wanted to have a discussion how that kind of movement affects the teaching practice, the research practice, and the pedagogical practice at the university as a whole, and also at the departments and programs, and even courses. What does it mean for the departments that are dealing with fine arts? What does it mean for the departments that are dealing with technology? What does it mean for the departments that deal with medicine, with journalism, all kinds of professions which are represented in our programs? And then when we realized quite quickly that the guidance for teachers have to be a bit different than the guidance for students. So the policy that we created was then translated for the students. And I will go through this policy at the moment. I will show you the important parts that we have discussed and why we have formed the policy the way we formed it. Because in this particular policy, almost every word that we used is a special. We have discussed it for a very, very long time. It has special meaning. So if we just look at the first part, at the very beginning of the policy, we as the University Education Board and as a university wanted to have a very clear stance. We wanted to make a statement. Are we for or against generative AI? So the first part of our policy was about our view as the entire university. Anything from medicine to fine or performing arts. We wanted to take a stand on what generative AI is and how we want to do it. And the first underlying statement, it says it does not prohibit. That was a statement that we discussed for quite a long time. We discussed whether this should be allowed, we should be prohibited, and we ended up with does not prohibit. There was a lot of discussion, why don't we just say that it's allowed? And that has a very important legal implication. If we said that this was allowed in this policy, if we said that we allow as a university to use generative AI, it would make it very difficult for the disciplinary board to consider cases where students have gone over the line and actually used it in a different way. Because allowing would mean that anybody who used AI would take this policy and say, look, the University of Gothenburg allows me to use generative AI. So by not prohibiting, we want to say that we delegate the responsibility to teachers, researchers, to decide if, when, and how generative AI should be used by students in their coursework and examinations. And we also said that it's not any type of decision. We also said that this means that teachers and examiners can recommend, restrict, or permit use of generative AI tools in certain circumstances. Those are very important statements that that the teachers cannot do whatever they want. They can only recommend, restrict, or permit using generative AI. The first part, the recommendation, has to do with pedagogy. We want to prepare our students for the future of their job, of their profession, of their life. The second one is about restrictions, that teachers have to be very clear what is not allowed to be used in context of examinations or coursework. And of course, the permit when the teachers want to use that, be a bit more ambivalent to it. The other part that was also very important was that we wanted to stress that students are responsible for understanding the policy. We wanted to make sure that it's not only the responsibility of teachers or researchers, it's also the responsibility of students, or primarily the responsibility of students. Then, when we had this stance, we spent quite a lot of discussion on the actual definition. What is generative AI? One could say back then in 2023, ChatGPT was the main tool. If you look at things today, there is a whole plethora of tools that use generative AI in one or another way. So one question that we discussed in this board quite a long time was, how do we provide a guidance to teachers who are not working with generative AI to make a decision if something falls under this policy, if something is generative AI or not? We provided certain examples, as you see, but also we provided the definition at the beginning, saying that this tool has to generate new content based on the data from previously published content. That is very important because we did not want to restrict anybody from using generative AI on their own production. We did not want to say, for example, that an artist who has painted a lot of paintings is prohibited suddenly from using generative AI to produce new paintings on his material. We did not want to do that. That's why we said it's based on published data. We also said that we cannot future-proof this definition or these statements forever. We have to make sure that the teachers and students have the responsibility to further investigate whether their tools that they are using are essentially using generative AI or not. May sound like a trivial question for us who are from computer science or software engineering, but it's not a trivial question for every teacher. And it shouldn't be the question for every teacher to understand the details of how ChatGPT generates text or creates pictures or images. They should be focused on their own profession. That's why they should take a look at what it means to have AI-generated context in their tools that they use for education and for the examination. The third part of our policy was the guidance. We said that the reason why we want to encourage using generative AI is because we want our students to learn. And we said that we know that AI will affect the learning of every student, and that we encourage every student and every teacher to take an active role in understanding where and how this learning is going to be affected. We wanted to take the discussion about generative AI from the basic level of cheating or examinations to the level of academic maturity. We wanted teachers to reflect on the use of AI in the context of learning and in context of pedagogy and teaching. And finally, in that part, we also very quickly recognize and explicitly stated that there are no tools that could actually, with 100% certainty, detect AI-generated content. The reason why we had this statement is for the disciplinary board, because if we didn't have it, we could have cases where somebody would commit a problematic action, and then they would say that I used tool X and it didn't say anything. It didn't block me from that, like a plagiarism tool does today. That's why we said it has to be a human judgment. It has to be in the eye of the examiner or the teacher to actually understand and make an assessment whether this is allowed or not allowed in accordance to our policy. And that brings us to the last part of our policy, which essentially is something that we debated quite a long time, is how do we link the new policy to the existing policies at the University of Gothenburg? We have over 70 different policies when it comes to just education alone at the university. So adding one more policy creates an essential and inherent risk that whatever that policy introduces is going to be in contrast to some other policy. That's why in this fourth part, we essentially said that AI, and generative AI in particular, is a tool. It's not a person, it's not a subject, it doesn't think just like a human being. This is a tool that has to be used responsibly. And we listed a number of different policies that one has to follow if using generative AI both in education and in examinations. We started to have a discussion with examiners, with the teachers, and my colleagues Johan and Matthias will talk more about the details of those discussions and how to use generative AI. But from the policy side, we wanted to very, very strongly stress that this policy is not in a vacuum, that this policy complements and explains how to use a specific type of tool. And that type of tool is the tool that generates new content in the context of education and in the context of the examination at the University of Gothenburg. And those, at the end of that policy, we have a list of important documents that are linked to that. Now, what does it mean for the large university as today? Well, first of all, that policy had a profound impact on how we think about generative AI at the University of Gothenburg. First of all, we have a number of courses for our teachers and for our researchers about using generative AI. We have courses about using that in an active way in pedagogy. We have courses in teaching how to avoid formulating questions for the exam that could lead to using generative AI in a very easy way. We also encouraged quite many departments and faculties to create their own policies. And today, if I look at our university, there is more than just one policy for generative AI. Almost every course has some sort of stance, whether they permit, they prohibit, or they encourage use of generative AI. And they describe the way they want to do it. If I look at the way the courses do it, we don't have a uniform way of doing that, simply because we are a broad university and we have so many different disciplines. For my discipline, which is software engineering, using GitHub Copilot is one of the important things. But for my colleagues from the Department of Performing and Fine Arts, they don't care about production of Python or C++ code. They care about production of pictures, images, films. The second impact that we had was that the students and researchers started to be more secure when using generative AI in courses. Students are much more aware of what is allowed and what is not allowed. They understand their own responsibility in this question. They don't have to ask the same question over and over again to the disciplinary board or to the teachers. We have a policy that takes care of that. We also observed that the digital exams in lecture halls started to replace written assignments, simply because they combine the best of two worlds, being digital, being able to correct the exam very quickly after the actual exam event, and also securing that they are not, that the students are not able to use ChatGPT or any other tool in a wrong way during that particular examination. And with this, I would like to conclude my talk. Thank you very much for having me. I'll be happy to take questions. And I hope that you will remember those three takeaways about the new possibilities of generative AI, about the societal class, that introducing generative AI, it comes with a cost, and maybe not everybody can afford doing that. And that our jobs are not going to be replaced by AI. They will be replaced by someone with AI, using AI. And my colleagues Johan and Matthias will talk more about how that could happen. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much, Miroslav. It was a really interesting presentation to go through the policy for AI at the University of Gothenburg. I would like to pose a question to you, a short question and a short answer from you, hopefully. So my question is, what kind of benefits do you see with such a general policy? Because if we may say, this is a quite open policy without a lot of guidance. can you name shortly the benefits of such a policy?
Our main benefit with that policy is the fact that we have a university's statement how we actually react upon generative AI and the relation to existing rules and regulations at the university which are affected by that generative AI. And I think that's, even if the policy is quite open, those two things are extremely important for every university to take. This is something that the students expect.
Right. Thank you so much. You will be able to elaborate further on the discussion that we will have with my colleague. So now we would like to move forward to our next presenter. The next presenter is Johan Lundin. Johan Lundin is a professor at the Department of Applied IT at the University of Gothenburg. And he is going to present to us how AI affects the higher education and the need for new competence and skills. That's for sure that we will need to have. So welcome, Johan. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me here today. It's very interesting to hear Miroslav talk, and I think it fits nicely with what I want to lift today. There are many available talks on how generative AI or AI more broadly will change education. So I will maybe not kind of cover the whole field in that sense. It's not possible in 20 minutes to do that. But I will try to focus on some other aspects, which I think also has a profound impact on education in general and education more and higher education. So with that said, let's talk a little bit about why artificial intelligence and digital technology have kind of greater consequences for education compared to a lot of other technologies that we have around. And I'm trying to go towards this by focusing on perspectives that explain how thinking, learning, and thus also education can be understood as integrated with the tools that we have around us and with the technologies that we use. This might not come as a kind of surprise to those that work with education. Much of what we do is to train students and pupils to use tools in their work in different ways and to understand them. But to me, kind of these perspectives really is central to understand how AI has a profound effect on how we learn, and then also as a consequence on education. So let's start with the picture of the abacus in the bottom middle here. So the abacus is a very old tool. It's used for mathematical calculations. So with this tool, if you know how to use it, you are able to do more advanced mathematical operations. Your mathematical thinking is altered by the use of the abacus. So I think it's a very nice example to explain how particular tools that we have affect how we think about certain things, and then also how we must be educated about those things. But if you don't know how to use the abacus, then it's just beads on a frame or on a plate, like in this image here. So to me, this really exemplifies how thinking in this way is distributed between us as humans and the tools that we use in that sense. And we can think more advanced thoughts by including these tools in what we do. And just as an example, on the bottom right, you have the dinner book proposed by Alan Kay more than 50 years ago, showing how digital technologies have kind of always been thought about as a tool for education and learning in those ways. The dinner book was envisioned as a tool for children to engage in creative and educational activities in that sense. So going back to the abacus, I think it's a nice example because it's very kind of confined and limited in that way. But if you look at the top picture, it's kind of a blurry image of dental surgery station. So there's a lot of different x-rays of teeth. There's other systems that you can gain information from. And the complexity in that setup is far greater than in the simple abacus example. But also with these tools, we think. And also with these tools, we need to educate ourselves in relation to different professions and different activities that we want to engage in. It's also the case that what we see is not directly accessed in the systems. So there's systems behind systems, there's layers that we have to understand, and so on. So the complexity of the tools that we engage with is ever increasing in that sense. And then we have a student on the bottom left. I think the picture is maybe 20 years old. But already then we see a plethora of kind of tools engaged with in that sense. And I mean, as a comment maybe to the discussion on digital or analog activities in education, I mean, you see both books and computers at the table of the student, supporting his learning and thinking in that sense. So why might this be so important for education then? The image here portrays archivists in France, almost 100 years ago now. So this is something that happens in a time where industrialization is becoming kind of a huge transformation in society and has already been for several years. So in this sense, kind of technology proposes that we might transform what is understood as meaningful human knowledge. And I think it's nice that the picture, for me, it really symbolizes how these kind of metaphors on how to organize ourselves, the society and organizations, affect how we then design our activities and consequently also design our educational activities. It also means that what is understood as meaningful knowledge changes over time. So when we introduce these different tools and ways of organizing our work and our educational activities, this also changes what is understood as meaningful knowledge for humans. And if you look at the image, then kind of conformity, central discipline, it's the assembly line metaphor that really affects how we deal with formal papers, and particular skills becomes important here, such as organizing information, retrieving them rapidly, and so on. This means that in the kind of broadest way that we can think about it, the large transformational changes of technology affects how we understand our society. So let's move on a little bit closer to AI then. So if you look at current research on the development of AI, I would argue that they rarely kind of take these larger aspects into account. I see a lot of discussion in education on how particular things can be kind of augmented or automated. It is very much kind of oriented towards how to, as I say, delegate human tasks to machines, but not really transforming activities in the larger sense. So as we introduce particular technological tools to do particular things, then in a way we sustain the way that things are currently done today. And it's interesting because it kind of cements how we organize things in very, very strong ways, rather than kind of question it. So I think there's an important point here to be made, that we need to really think about how new technology might transform and might change education in this case. So today, rather than, for example, an industrialization or an assembly belt idea of education, we see how the kind of memes or ideas of current technology development drives individualization, for example. And then we will have to think about, well, is that something that we want to see to a larger degree in our educational activities? And do we want to delegate particular things to machines in that sense? yeah, so we see a lot of studies and development now kind of adapting educational activities to individuals in different ways. As I said, I typically think about these things as in terms of the concept of delegation. I mean, over time, we see this in all parts of society, the idea that human tasks are delegated to machines. It's natural. I mean, it's a part of why we have innovation and engineering to relieve us from doing particular things as humans. But the act of delegation demands quite a lot of us. We have to foresee some of the consequences of that particular delegation. We have to make sure that it's done in a proper and responsible way. And what we know is that typically the delegation of human tasks to machines comes with some unwanted and also unexpected activities. And I would argue that this is particularly common when we look at the delegation of intellectual activities from human to machines. So this means that such delegation, in particular within education, cannot only revolve around ideas of increased efficiency of educational activities. It also have to include a number of aspects that are also central to human intelligence, such as being engaged in particular questions, or as with the case with the policy, the organization takes a subjective stance on an issue. So here we have to expand our knowledge, both in terms of understanding short-term and long-term consequences of human-machine delegation activities. We also see quite a lot of aspects relevant to the idea of augmenting particular tasks here. And I think that is an interesting aspect, but I would really like to see it engage more with what kind of augmentation would be interesting for us as humans here. I think it very often takes the starting point of what is possible with AI and generative AI at the moment, and very rarely forces us to ask a question, how would we like to enhance our capabilities in different ways? So I partly agree with the claim that, I mean, it's not AI, it's someone with AI that might take my job. But I think the answer to that question is also to include strategic thinking and individual stance on how would I like intelligence to be augmented in relation to what is important to me and what I do in different ways. And I think also closely related to the idea of delegating aspects in terms of education that has relevance is to think about what is the actual purpose of educational activities. We tend to forget that in our eager work to improve things or make things more efficient or increase the quality of education. But we often tend to forget what's the point of education. And I mean, you could consider education to have the point of training for a particular job or particular work, but I would argue that there's also other alternative perspectives that you can take. So, for example, most of the things that I know, I have little or no practical use of, but I really like to know them, and I have learned them. And I assume that this is very similar to many other people. We like to learn things, and it has it has value and meaning to ourselves to educate ourselves in these issues. Yeah. So to further explore a little bit about this aspect of what machines should do and what we should do ourselves, the recent development of AI, I think, has done a very interesting thing. It has forced us to think more about human intelligence. And as a little illustration, I asked one of the generative AI large language models to do a number of abacuses on the right. And even though I'm not able to do any calculations with an abacus, I can directly see that all three of them are functionally useless. So it's obvious to me, but it's not obvious to to the model. And that kind of started me to think about, well, how come I can see that they are not useful? What do I bring to that evaluation of the construction here? This is a very old question within AI research. I brought up a quote from Dreyfus and Dreyfus, where they discuss kind of the highest level of human intelligence, and they point to these aspects that it's situational, so it can be adapted to the local context of the application of knowledge. And I think that is very interesting. They also bring up the idea of being involved, so it's something that I'm engaged in. Which is something different from the idea of kind of neutral, objective use of knowledge, but rather kind of bringing in particular statements, taking a stand as a point or as a person or as an organization. And in terms of education, I think this is highly relevant. Education is very relational. It's something that is quite different from when we as individuals engage with learning on a particular subject. If you have teachers, if you have students, the relation between teachers and students are relevant, and the relations between teachers, students, and subject is also highly relevant in education. So in terms of assessment and grading, for example, it means something that is not a machine that grades or assesses the student's work. It means something that this is done by an actual person that is involved in the activity, that has some engagement here, both for practical reasons in terms of how education is organized. You might have to motivate a grade, but also that we need people that are kind of responsible for how the education is organized. So we need people to take that stance. Another interesting aspect here is that when we think a lot about artificial intelligence, I think that we often tend to kind of downplay human intelligence. Sometimes it's even seen as a problem that we are subjective or that we have a personal engagement. I think it drives a very strong idea of kind of intelligence as objective and in a sense dehumanizes many of the values of human intelligence here. And I think in terms of kind of the delegation to machines in general, I think this is a problem, but I think in particular in relation to education, I think it's a problem that we tend to kind of downplay what humans not only do better than machines, but what humans do that it's impossible to kind of think about in terms of delegation here. Yeah. So, for example, like with the example with that Miroslav gave with the policy. To delegate the work of creating a policy to generative AI would be pointless in a sense. But we will have those tools at our hands over time, and we will increasingly come into the position where we intentionally have to make a decision whether or not we will do this ourselves or we will have machines do it instead. So I think that is one of the things in terms of what do we need to train for. It's to make a number of decisions where it has a point to delegate something in terms of efficiency and so on. And when it's pointless or not very useful to do it in that sense, because we will continuously come into situations where it might be easier for us to have language models create a response to certain things, to create material and so on, or create presentations like this. And to me, listening to presentations that are generated in that sense would be pointless. I want to meet people that takes a stance and that has an opinion on certain things. I think that is central to the kind of communication activities that we engage in very often. I think also the risk that we stand in for here is as we come into difficult situations where it's possible to delegate things to machines, we also risk to kind of misunderstand human intelligence and turn humans into machines in many practices. If we do not kind of value what human intelligence can bring into certain processes and think about that as problematic, then we will increasingly kind of make humans into machines in different ways, in terms of being objective and so on. I mean, maybe subjectivity is a very kind of strong proposal to work with here. Yeah, so finally I will draw some more concrete examples from some of the research that we have been doing. So the project here is a project that is coming from where we look at educational activities. So this is coming from school, but I think I've picked a number of examples that are equally relevant to higher education. The project is called Missing Teacher in AI. It's sponsored by the WASP-HS, the Wallenberg effort. Over a couple of years, we have been looking at how teachers in different ways can be involved, both in the design and in the design of the implementation and use of AI in educational activities. And we are particularly interested in terms of kind of fairness and equality in education, which is a central concept in school and in higher education. So we wanted to see both what kind of competence needs might we see among teachers, but also what kind of values do they feel are central in the use of AI in different educational activities. So one of the things that we looked at was the aspect of individualization, as I mentioned earlier here. And I will not have to have time to go through a lot of the kind of activities or data that we did, but we involved teachers and students, principals, and educational developers in activities, looking at, I mean, what they might want to do. And it's interesting to see the kind of difference that we found in terms of their expectations and wishes for AI, and when we started to relate that to practical educational activities. So one of the aspects that was central here was that a lot of education is based on us doing collective activities, which then individualization of education comes as a driving force that makes collective activities more difficult. So if you have students that are on very different levels in an education, then it will become increasingly difficult to make it meaningful to engage in collective activities here. And what we also found that was in many of the available tools that we looked at, but also in terms of the practical engagement of teachers, it was quite difficult for them to adapt and control education in that sense. So here we found that teachers, they both need to understand somewhat more about the functioning and the functionality of adaptive tools. But we also needed them to be educated on how to make particular decisions on the involvement of the tools. And the tools also needed to have some kind of interface that allowed them to make those kind of decisions to control how they were used in education. Yeah, and as I said, I mean, education is a highly social activity. So kind of making it impossible to do collective activities would then make the teachers choose not to use these particular tools. As I said, we are working intensively with the ideas of responsible and fair and equal introduction. And one final thing then that might be interesting is that there are a number of kind of frameworks and guidelines and acts and even laws about how AI could be included in education. What we found in our studies was that these ones had a difficulty to kind of have that impact on actual education because frameworks are general, but educational activities in the classroom is very situated. It's contextual in that sense. So we are starting to work with the concept of situational fairness instead. Which means that teachers then must have the ability to secure this. They are held accountable in the classroom for these activities. And it's rarely possible for them to relate to the frameworks. And as tools are often highly automated, it's difficult for them to kind of uphold fairness and equality in the classrooms. So to conclude, we need to educate our students and ourselves much more in judgment and decision making in terms of using generative AI in education. But we also have to train all students that are focusing on any practice to establish these kind of possibilities over time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Johan. Really interesting presentation, and it looks like there is need for new competence and skills.
Yeah.
I would like to pose also a question to you before you go. So my question to you is, why does it seem to be such a lack of research on how new technology affects skills and competences?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the main reasons is that a lot of the research on technology has been very innovation focused. Mm-hmm. We have spent much less time looking at how actual technology in use affects and transforms practice in a sense. We need both, I would argue, and we need much more of research understanding the consequences of AI and digital technology as implemented in educational practice.
Mm-hmm. Hope we get more of this soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like at this moment to remind all of you watching our webinar to pose your questions on chat, because during the panel discussion that will follow afterwards, we will have the chance to pose them, hopefully most of them, to the speakers. So please use the chat to write down your questions you might have for Miroslav or Johan and Matthias coming now on the stage to present. So I would like to introduce Matthias von Feiligen. I hope I pronounce it right. He is pedagogical developer at the Department of Applied IT at the University of Gothenburg. And Matthias is going to present how generative AI will affect or is already affecting teaching and assessment. So, Matthias, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. It's very nice to be here to talk to you about these issues that are really relevant to discuss a lot, and that we have been discussing now for quite some time, even if it's only been a year and a half. And I will mainly, let's see, yeah, there it is, the correct slide, sorry. So I will mainly focus on what the work we have been doing at the University of Gothenburg regarding these issues. I also work at our unit for pedagogical development and interactive learning, where we support teachers in developing their teaching and teaching skills, and also giving courses in higher education. And of course, I could talk a lot of different things, like environmental issues when it comes to training these models or using them, or ethical issues like access to technologies and equal access to them, or which data is represented in the models, and etc. But I will today only focus on these parts mainly, because that's what I usually talk to my colleagues about at the University of Gothenburg. So, as you all know, we had a pandemic for quite some time, and it affected higher education quite a lot. We had to work from home, we had to do all the teaching from home. And then we got back, and this happened, and the reaction was something like this, like, no, not again. I met teachers who were almost panicking, the same teachers that have been panicking a couple of years ago when they had to change everything due to the pandemic. And they were really tired of working with educational development and especially developing their ways of assessing the students' knowledge and skills. They had to do that already once, so why should they have to do that again? And of course, that's one of the issues that I will address today quite a lot, but also some other things, because we can also see that it tends to be that our colleagues are kind of in being interested in how they can use generative AI for different purposes, and are thinking about how they can benefit from that in different ways. So it's more like this, you know, the Indiana Jones movie where he's replacing the golden idol with a bag of sand, you know, just to get the good stuff. So we see some risks with this. As Johan was talking only briefly about, we can see that teachers may think of replacing themselves in grading, but how will that affect their work? What will happen if we replace ourselves in important parts where we actually need to be as teachers? But let's get back to the assessment part. This has been the main issue and main focus in the discussions at the University of Gothenburg and among teachers since late November 2022, or maybe January 2023, when things started to spread and people were getting to know more about this. And many teachers were, of course, concerned about their students being able to cheat, that they now had the opportunities to do that in a way that we wouldn't be able to see and find out. We weren't able to identify that they had been using Gen AI to produce texts. And at many departments, the go-to assessment, the go-to exam is take-home exams. So that's the way many of the departments and courses and programs are assessing their students. And that means that they were even more concerned about this. I've been talking to a lot of the teachers at the University of Gothenburg, but not one single teacher from the mathematics department, because I don't think they actually use take-home exams, so they weren't affected by this. Not in that case, anyway. So there were a lot of focus on this, and if we can find ways of having secure exams, can we create it in different ways? How can we do that? Preferably without no risk at all of Gen AI being used. But I've been trying to get another perspective into the discussion here, because secure exams doesn't only mean that we make sure that we assess the students' product, that it's actually their texts or their products, but it also has to be the perspective of that we have assessment methods that gives us the opportunity to assess the learning outcomes. And not all learning outcomes can be assessed in one single way. So we need a diversity of assessment methods. So we had to address these issues in different ways, and when I've discussed this with my colleagues, both at the University of Gothenburg and other universities across Sweden, we have seen these ways of discussing solutions. There have been questions about using detection tools, and as Miroslav mentioned, there are no tools that work. They only they can, to some extent, identify AI generated texts, but the bigger risk is not that it doesn't find AI generated text, but rather that it identifies human written text as AI generated. Now that would be a big problem if we were to approach a student and say, well, the system says that you have used AI to generate this text when he or she had done it themselves. So no detection tools. And then there were discussions, should we move to written exams only, where there were supervised small closed rooms with no internet access, or maybe just some access to certain tools or sites. And as I mentioned recently, well, not all types of learning outcomes can be measured through written exams. We have to have a diversity of types of assessment, as we have a diversity of types of learning outcomes. And then there were more like innovative solutions. I should have put quotes around that innovative part, but we've seen examples of teachers trying to use invisible text, or at least writing some text into an assignment description and making it white, so that it would, when they would copy and paste that into an AI tool, the AI would produce a chunk of text that will be recognizable as AI generated, or at least it would be easy for us teachers to recognize that. So would that be a good idea? Well, it sounds like a good idea, right? But there are ways of going around this. And if those students who are really, really skilled and finding these things, well, then they would have the opportunity to cheat and the others wouldn't. Also, there's quite some ethical concerns about this. Should we actually trick our students into cheating? I don't think that is a good idea. Instead, we have been talking about these things at the University of Gothenburg at the PEAL unit, that it's called, Unit for Pedagogical Development and Interactive Learning, as well as with my colleagues at the Department of Applied IT. We have to find, of course, different ways of assessing students. We need to revise assessment methods, but that may include new ways of assessing students, but also looking at how we phrase questions and formulate questions, doing multiple assessment types or combining different assessments. They're beginning to come some studies on this, some reports of people trying different ways. And hopefully in a couple of years, we will have even better research around these issues. So we give the recommendations of either having written exams or oral exams, but also focus on the process. So when you actually have to have a take-home exam to measure learning, the way the students meet their learning outcomes, you should follow the process. And that also gives you the opportunity to actually give support and feedback to the students, which will help them in their learning. What's even more important, usually when I talk to my colleagues, I only briefly touch upon this, because I think we've found that information is more crucial. It's more important to work with information. And as you heard Miroslav present earlier, this is up to the teachers and examiners to actually inform the students about what is allowed and what is prohibited, depending on the different exams. And one of the benefits of doing it like that is also that it's easier to reach the students, to actually have them reading the instructions when it comes from their own teacher, not from someone up there in the sky giving, pointing, saying what you should and shouldn't do. And we can also see some really early results of this. There's a colleague at the School of Global Studies who has been using this in a lot of information, and as well informing and teaching her students about using generative AI and the consequences of doing that in different ways for different purposes. And she also there's a requirement that they should include a statement of generative AI in their exams. And the latest results were that among 30 students, only 2 of them used generative AI, and only for small language revisions and help with language. And they had to also enclose why they did use or didn't use generative AI. And most of them actually said, well, it affects my learning. So that's quite nice to hear. So that means that information is really important. There was a report from a project at Chalmers University here in Gothenburg in the spring of 2023. They sent out a survey to students in Sweden, and they got about 6,000 replies. And that survey showed that students wanted information. They were really unsure of what's okay and what's not okay to use and to do. So that goes to show that this is really important. But of course, also support. The teacher that I mentioned now at School of Global Studies, she also works with support for students, supporting students in their academic writing. And by doing that, focusing on academic writing, you can also bring in these questions regarding using generative AI for different purposes, because it may sound trivial. I only use Gen AI to revise my text a bit, to find new ways of phrasing this sentence, for example. But what this also shows is that she's talking about content drifting. That means that the AI is actually affecting the content. It may not look like that, but you need to understand the subject really well to see this. That is also maybe not possible for a student to do. And then, of course, I tell my colleagues to focus more on teaching and learning, because that's also what we're here to do. We are here to teach our students things. There was a small study now published a couple of weeks ago. They're researchers, and they interviewed students about degree apathy. That is how they feel about their studies, about getting a degree, if it's important to them or not, and why. And they were also questioning them about how they were feeling about using ChatGPT for different purposes. And these results showed also that the higher the degree apathy, the larger the risk of them using generative AI to solve assignments. So making sure that our students know why they are here is also really important. And when it comes to opportunities and challenges regarding teaching and learning with generative AI, well, of course, there's lots of opportunities. We need to think that it's not a question of whether we should use AI or not. It's how we should use it and why we should use it and when. So it relates to what Johan mentioned earlier about delegation. What work can we delegate to a system or a machine that we don't have to do ourselves? And also, what are the consequences of doing that? But we see now at the University of Gothenburg that teachers are using it in many different ways, both for pedagogical purposes and administrative purposes. And we have access to decent tools for doing that. Students are also, they're also using these tools. They have access to the same tools as we teachers have. We use Copilot. So they can use that for their studies, get support in asking questions on a PDF or producing flashcards or whatever. So, of course, there are opportunities, but we also need to be aware of the challenges, of course. And I usually bring up the challenge. One of the challenges that has been maybe presented as the main challenge, and that is, at least in educational settings, that is the risk of inaccuracies, in AI producing inaccurate content.
But we also need to talk about bias, of course. And I think it's important to teach our students about this as well, so they know when and how they can use this. This is an example of a colleague that asked Copilot in PowerPoint to create a presentation about academic writing. And this is only part of the slide I've hidden just for effect, of course. But as you see, if you know something about academic writing, you can see that, well, this is okay, this is good. These bullet points are legit. And then PowerPoint created an image, and it looked like this. And that's also evidence, of course, but it's not evidence that can be related to academic writing, but rather kidnapping. So this is, and this is, of course, a really, you know, there's nothing, this is so clear that this is wrong. But when the inaccuracies get more subtle, how should we be able to identify them? What do we need to know to be able to identify the inaccuracies? Another challenge that I'm talking about this more and more nowadays with my colleagues, is that if our students use these tools in the wrong way, they will not learn anything. So if a student use support for let's say a process, they summarize a PDF, they use that summary to draft a paper, then they use generative AI to draft some research. They use Gen AI in support of data collection, create surveys. They use Gen AI to analyze the results, and finally to get help with writing. Then where's the student? What have they learned with this? And you need to know what it is you're replacing to be able to use it in a responsible way. And that is what I'm focusing on mostly now when I'm talking to my colleagues. What happens to students' learning if you integrate generative AI in your courses? What happens if the students use it? And as a teacher, you're responsible for actually informing your students about these things. So again, like Johan was talking about, delegating work. What are the consequences if we delegate work to a machine? What will happen then? And of course, we need to be careful not to see this only as a student issue. As teachers, we are responsible for helping our students learn. We teach the content of our courses, but it's also a matter of being a student. They need skills and knowledge to be able to learn, to know how to study, to learn things. So what we try to do at the University of Gothenburg is, I work with teachers mainly, but there are other units, unit for academic language and writing, who support students with academic writing, but now also to some extent with generative AI issues. We have the library also supporting students in different ways and giving workshops about these things. But we need to do more, and hopefully we will do more soon, I guess. Yep, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Matthias.
Thank you.
For your presentation. Before you leave, I would like to, I would like to pose a question as well to you. You mentioned that teachers need to inform the students and guide them on how to use generative AI. So are they expected also to give them specific information how to use generative AI? Where is the boundaries? And
Yeah, I think so. I think that we cannot remove that from the specific area, the subject area, because it may be closely related to the subject area. So if we do it separately, well, of course, some things could be like on a higher level, like how does Gen AI work? But what happens if we use it within the subject area as students for doing different things? That is something, I guess, it would be easier for a teacher to manage. And it doesn't take that much, actually.
Okay.
I've seen examples. It's quite easy.
It's easy, yeah. Okay,
Thank
we're looking forward to learn more about
you.
this topic. Thank you. In the discussion that will follow, and this will be moderated by my colleague Raquel Broman, who is head of competence at AI Sweden. But before introducing my Raquel and welcome her to the stage, as well as the speakers, I would like to remind you to pose your questions on the chat. Write them down so my colleague can pose them, and we'll try our best to go through all of them. So please welcome Raquel Broman, Head of Competence.
Thank you so much, Eudoxia.
Yeah.
And I would like to welcome you guys up on stage. Very welcome. I will try to also connect this to the switch here. Give me a minute. Okay. So, thank you so much. It's been so interesting to listen. I have been very focused in the background, and thank you again for giving me this opportunity to spend a few minutes with you guys, elaborating a little bit more about the different topics that you have been presenting about today. And I have a lot of questions, of course, and I have picked up some of the questions from the audience as well. So I will try my best to also keep track in the chat for more questions from the audience. But before we start, I would like to know a little bit more about how you work in your everyday life with generative AI. Miroslav, would you like to?
Yes, of course. Thank you. So by the end of the day, I'm a programmer and software architect. So of course, I use GitHub Copilot a lot. I think that's the best thing that has happened since the sliced bread in the programming world. It's maybe I'm a bad programmer, who knows? But I think that it helps me to be much more productive. I feel that at least 10 times productive increase I could achieve with doing that. I don't have to look at things that I don't often use on the internet. On that, it's not a perfect tool. It makes mistakes sometimes. So it feels that I'm still needed, and it's still a copilot. But I definitely use that a lot.
And do you feel, because there has been a lot of discussions here about thinking and reflecting on how you're using those tools. Have you noticed anything in your workflow or process now when these tools have been introduced?
I noticed that I'm much more higher level, focused on the algorithms and solving the problems rather than thinking, how do I shift these bits or bytes from one place to another? So made me much more intelligent, as Johan mentioned in his presentation, reflecting a bit more on what does it mean to be a software engineer today compared to what it used to be for a few years ago.
Yeah, and that's very interesting. It's something that we are going to continue to elaborate a little bit around. And Johan, how are you using generative AI?
Yeah, so I mean, first I play with it a lot. I try things, I let it do things and see what it does and so on. I think that's quite nice. And I mean, being a professor is sometimes a lonely job, and then you have someone that never gets tired of your ideas and so on. So that is one of the things that I do. I think it's also useful in terms of, in relation to what I was thinking or talking about. I mean, if I feel that some of the things that I do can be easily done by large language models, then I start to question whether or not it's a point to do it at all. So I think that's interesting. I mean, is this really worthwhile doing? So I think those are kind of two of the interesting ways of working with them for me.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and I'm using them daily, I would say, for many different purposes, like summarizing texts and not having to read that much, just reading just a little bit to see if this is something that I should focus on or not, if I can just leave it. But I also see that I've changed my way of working quite a bit. I started, for this presentation that I give now, instead of writing all my notes that I usually do, I just talked. And then I transcribed that with an AI model and summarized that as well. So I could get, it was much quicker and much easier. And also when I read it, I felt that, well, this doesn't work. Yeah. So I changed my way of doing things to some extent.
Fantastic.
And all the images, of course. I don't have to look for an image anymore. That's great.
And you're shifting between tools as well.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah. But I end up with ChatGPT all the time. Sorry to say, no, I don't get paid, but still.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that is one of the most interesting parts from my perspective, to look at, how workflows and processes are going to change, and how, again, we will need to reflect on what we are doing and what we need to learn. But going back to the policy, Miroslav, I mean, you started your work quite early, really fast when you saw that the change was coming. And you also said that you kind of created a task force with different disciplines. How was the thinking process about who to include in this work with the policy?
So the process was quite interesting. So the educational board is not the board that's always in agreement about everything. So just having one group was already a success. But for us, when we started to create this policy, it was very obvious that we want to be inclusive in terms of who we want to involve in the board. And of course, having Matthias, who was also in that task force from the educational unit, pedagogical development, was a given fact, because he's involved in many policies that are around education. Having a lawyer with us, university lawyer, who's working with disciplinary cases, was also given that we needed to have this kind of view of what really is the problem with generative AI from their perspective, and also someone from technology and the sciences, just to understand where is the technology going. For example, the question that we have in our policy, that it's generating new content. But of course, we have new technology, which is called RAG, Reality Augmented Generation, and it's just summarization. It's not really generation of new content. So how to define those tools was a very, very intricate task. And also social sciences, we needed to have someone who actually understands how students as a social group reason about that. And we, of course, had students with us in that group who provided their perspective of what their fears and what their hopes and what their learning process can be affected. So just having the group was very important for us to understand. And this group was not really tasked with creating a policy. It was tasked with creating a suggestion of the policy, which then went back to the education board, where every faculty, every discipline could say something, and then it went to all the departments to be able to agree on that. But all in all, I think that it went much smoother than with every other policy that we discussed, simply because there was a very important need for us to have it, and very big support from everyone, including the rector or vice chancellors.
And you also mentioned that it was on purpose written quite general, maybe not, I wouldn't say high level, but you also wanted the different faculties to kind of take over and translate it. Was it?
Yes, partially the faculties, but also partially we wanted to stress the individual responsibility at teachers and students, that it's not going to be rector or vice chancellor who will come and say this is allowed, this is not allowed, but everybody has to, the students have to actively seek that information somewhere, but also teachers that they actively must show what is allowed and not allowed, just to increase that maturity, and also say that this is not a secondary school where we are very direct, but this is an academic institution, and we want to be proud of the academic freedom and academic autonomy, but also academic maturity in those questions. And the question of generative AI is just one of many, where we don't want people to be restrained. We want people to be aware of that.
And I think that one of the parts that I was very impressed by was really that you have created two kind of policies, one for the students and one for the teachers. I really like the idea of, having a co-responsibility in this work, getting to know the tools and how we're going to work it. But how has this been accepted by the teachers and the students? I think that some of you mentioned that the interest from the students is very, very high, but there is some fatigue from the teachers about, again, trying to understand yet another policy. So how has the acceptance of the policy been?
As far as I know, it was very good. I think that teachers have been extremely happy about the fact that we have a policy. Before that, there was a lot of discussions whether we should have it or not. There were a lot of teachers and head of departments saying that, oh, look, University X has a policy. Should we have one? University Y has a policy with a traffic light model. Should we have this as specific or not? And the students were very happy that they have some sort of central guidance, that it's not up to every individual teacher or program to decide whatever they want, but there was some sort of framework for those kind of decisions. So the acceptance of the policy was overwhelmingly positive.
Fantastic.
Don't you think, it's a challenge at the moment when we leave this much responsibility to the teachers, and I'm in total agreement that that is the right thing to do. And at the same time, we see something that is developing so rapidly as we see now. It's really a challenge for many teachers to get the kind of space to be able to explore and do these kind of things, in particular since, what you knew about generative AI a year ago is maybe not that relevant today, and so on. So I think it would be really interesting to look into what we can do at the university collectively to support teachers in developing the competence they need to be able to make those kind of choices in their own teaching now.
Yeah, I think it's a very important question. I think Matthias is involved in a number of courses for teachers in using generative AI.
Yeah, that's right. We are trying to support in many different ways. Seminars, workshops. We're producing modules about this. We're looking at the national initiative from WASP-Ed, where I'm also involved, where we develop a nationwide resource that can be used to learn about not just generative AI, but AI to a large extent, what that is, how it affects higher education. So, but I agree with you, Johan. We need to solve this. We need to give the teachers even more chances to learn more about this. But I also would like to include the students, because even if students are, even if I think teachers should help the students to learn about what this is and how it affects their studies, some things should be at a university level, like academics writing support, for example. Maybe something like that would be good as well.
And I think that also, if we talk about students, that I see a lot of students that matured a lot in terms of their learning, also asking the right questions. So they would be using ChatGPT to solve a programming task. And if it was solved differently than on the lecture, they would start asking questions, why is it different? Who's right, who's wrong? Where am I? Who should I listen? And if we achieve this kind of maturity, I think that we have already won a lot, that we equip our students with the right kind of knowledge.
Mm-hmm. And I think, Matthias, that you were touching a little bit about the teacher role also in your presentation about, teachers need to keep teaching. And I think that has also been one of the main questions when these tools were introduced, how will the teacher role change? Would you mind elaborate a little bit on that, what you found?
Yeah. I think that's a really important question to ask. Where am I as a teacher in this development? And of course, 2 years from now, it may be totally different. When we have new models, maybe, we don't know yet, of course, and maybe things are different then. The latest model that we saw a couple of weeks ago from OpenAI showed a lot of potential when it comes to tutoring students and supporting students. But then there are other aspects, as Johan was talking about, with regards to the missing teacher project, and that we want someone there. We, as a teacher, we need some person. Students need a person there on the other side. Presenting things. We don't need a machine all the time. So I think the teacher shouldn't see this, and as you also mentioned, Miroslav, we won't be replaced by AI, not close to now at least. We will still be needed, but maybe rather introducing then what is relevant use of generative AI related to both mainly maybe the content of the course or the subject area or discipline, but also with regards to being a student at a university. How can I use this?
Yeah, and there was actually a question to you, Johan, from the audience. I will let you talk in a little bit. It was about the project that you mentioned, and the question was the learnings or the insights that will be gained in that project. Would that be transferable to academic teaching?
Yeah, in some cases it will, I would say. So, I mean, in terms of being able to control your educational context in some sense as a teacher, I would say that is one of the aspects that is totally transferable. I mean, that is very similar. I mean, to be able to be held accountable for what you do when you design an educational activity, to be accountable for what you do when you engage with activities in the classroom or in the lecture hall. I think those kind of aspects, I would say, are totally transferable in a sense. I would also argue that this idea of kind of building fair AI tools will be very difficult to uphold in various educational situations. What might be fair in one educational situation might be unfair in another one. So this kind of idea that we have at the moment that certain kind of dimensions can be included in AI to uphold fairness is kind of a misunderstanding, I would argue, about how fairness is kind of constantly produced in situations where we engage. So, I mean, those were the two things that I brought up here, which I think are, I mean, totally transferable between different educational contexts and situations in that sense. And there are others, but those were the two that I brought up today. Yeah.
And one thing that I found so interesting in your presentation was about, us really thinking about what kind of human capabilities we need to think about and take into regard, and how we want to build them together with technology. Would you mind elaborating a little bit more on that? Because I think that we are, as you also mentioned, always talking about the capabilities of the machines, but we are really talking about how they are going to help us become more.
Yeah. So I mean, recently we see actually more research coming into that area, more research kind of expanding our understanding on what it means to have human intelligence and what that might mean in different situations and practices and so on. I think that is a very nice consequence of introducing machines, that they make us start to think about what we are as humans. I think that's a very nice consequence of that. But I mean, maybe if it's a large topic, and maybe if I kind of point to one thing that reconnects to our answers of how we use generative AI and so on in our work. So there's also all these kind of minimal users or uses in other tools and so on that is brought in where language models play a role. And as I mentioned, I mean, tools affect how we think, and in particular language as the main tool. I mean, to all of us that knows a language, it's almost impossible to even imagine what thinking would be like not using words to think with. And in all our communicative tools that we have now, we always get these kind of suggestions on how to respond to others and so on. And one of the things, we might not think about them as kind of generative language model aspects, but as soon as we write a message in one of our online communication channels, I always get these kind of silly responses. Oh, great idea. I love that. It's very positive the whole time. And kind of being in academia, where our tool to quality improvement is critique. I mean, it's very interesting that every day we are proposed to not be critical towards our essays. Every day systems suggest that we are instead kind of positive right away. I think that's a very interesting thing, and it makes me think about, okay, what is it to be in academia, and what is it to be a human in relation to my colleagues?
And that's so interesting, because we are kind of forcing, or we are accepting a way of being that has been decided, I don't know, by someone or algorithms, that we need to be positive all the time. It's also one reflection that I made. Maybe I'm a grumpy person, How can I prompt my assistant to be grumpy? That would be a very, very nice.
Let me know if you fix that.
Yeah. But also I think that you all mentioned somehow either ethical or responsible way of using these tools. What do you mean by that? Miroslav, would you like to start?
So first of all, I think the responsible use of AI is to, first of all, see it as a tool and not as a person. So for the programming, it's called Copilot, GitHub Copilot, or any other kind of Copilots, and that is per design, because it is a Copilot. It's something that helps you with using it in a responsible way. And then you have to remember that at the university we're responsible for 50,000 students that need to understand how to use that responsibly. And the word responsible usage of AI will differ between different fields. So what is responsible for me in software engineering or computer science will be very different from what is responsible in, for example, pedagogy or in medicine and in other kind of faculties. So just the question of ethics and responsibility is not very easy on a broad university. That's, for example, why our policy is so broad. But again, I think that for us, it's important to understand that we are responsible for 50,000 students that will go out and do something. So we as teachers have to be responsible, and we have to teach the students not only how to prompt OpenAI, but how to, as Johan said, reflect on the knowledge they get from that, how to be able to understand what's the relation between the generated text, which is per definition just a text and the domain knowledge of that particular person. So you could generate a text about a medical condition, but that doesn't make you a doctor. I mean, it could still be very wrong if you don't know the domain very well. So responsibility is about being able to critically use that in order to make sure that we create new professionals from our university and not only new kind of prompt engineers that can prompt AI to something.
Yeah, and do I understand correctly also whether you put that responsibility also in the student and teachers?
Yes, definitely. When we started that, we already from the very beginning said that this cannot be a policy for teachers or for students. We are one university, and if you look at any students from University of Gothenburg, it's every time we talk about them or even describe somewhere, we don't talk about them as someone who studies at University of Gothenburg. We say student of University of Gothenburg and teachers at University of Gothenburg. They're part of the community, so we need to listen to what they want, and we will have to adjust as teachers. At the same time, we have to drive their development in the way that they will benefit from when they actually get their graduation, become alumni, and get into their professions.
Yeah, and I totally agree that to be able to act ethically demands certain things of the participants, and that is different in different contexts. Thus, we need to have different training for different persons and so on. But I think also one thing that we could add to that discussion of ethical automation and so on is the kind of long-term effects, because that is more difficult to have practitioners take responsibility for. So what would it mean if certain practices kind of are totally automated over time? Certain types of diagnosing where we are left in a position where no human kind of has the knowledge about how that is done over time. And that also has to be kind of dealt with in society by someone. I think that's a very important issue, because we cannot demand that practitioners think both on the kind of practical situated consequences as well as the long-term consequences of that. So I think it's very important that we on a university level think about what would it mean that we would introduce certain technologies in certain practices over time for us as a university.
Yeah, not sure that I have that much to add, but maybe on the thing that Miroslav said, that responsible use is that you use the tools in a responsible way. That is what kind of data you give to the model and for what purposes you use it, but also responsible use of the product from the AI, the output. How you use that and how you understand that product and the output. So I think it's two ways there, two parts of the ethical use of Gen AI.
And also coming into, knowledge, I think that in your presentation that, what is knowledge? It's so much more than just an output. It's the situation, is what you come with. And I think that is so fascinating to actually reflect on that. Because I think that we sometimes tend to forget why are we learning this, and how can I use the learning in some other ways. I think that
I mentioned a little bit about that, and I would say that a lot of our educational discussions is lacking that kind of basic idea. Why do we engage in education at all? And I think in the political debate and so on, there's sometimes kind of a very simple answer that we learn particular things to be able to use them in the future. And I mean, of course, that might be true in some sense, but I mean, we are also learning creatures. I mean, humans love to learn. Most of us learn and know a lot of things that we have no use for, other than kind of maybe playing Trivial Pursuit or doing other things. I mean, it's not productive in societal sense. It's not productive in a sense in relation to work, but there's a value in learning particular things. And I mean, I think that is something as a university that we need to kind of remember kind of the value of creating new knowledge, the value of educating students, not because it's useful, but because that is what universities do. We expand knowledge regardless of the practical use in society at the moment.
And do you see a risk? I seldom talk of risks, but do you see a risk now that we are seeing some tendencies that are promoting like the thinking around individualized learning? You can direct the learning depending on what you need to learn at that time. Do you see any risk there that we might limit our possibilities to learn and create knowledge, creating those types of tools?
Yeah, so I mean, I see kind of several challenges then maybe about that. But I mean, so there's this risk of kind of misunderstanding or not appreciating the qualities of the way that education is typically organized now. One might say that it's old and out-fashioned, but I mean, it's still a model of education that has evolved for thousands of years over time. And in a sense, education is the most amazing invention that humanity has ever come up with. I mean, going from where we were 1,000 years ago, and now almost every child in the world can read and write and calculate and so on. I mean, it's amazing in that sense. So of course, there's one risk of kind of making this only into an individual skills project in a sense. On the other hand, there's a risk that we will not be able to gain some of the benefits from new technology by not questioning the way that we organize education today. And I would say, I mean, to me, that is just as big of a challenge to look at, okay, how could we reorganize educational activities so that we are able to make use of these technological innovations that we have at the moment. And that doesn't mean necessarily that I'm kind of pro-technology in education. It's not that's not the point that I'm making here. But it's something that we really need to become more educated within academia, and we have to have much more space for experimenting and exploring that in our education as well as in our research, I would say.
Yeah, very interesting.
I think it's also for ourselves that we have completely different opportunity now. I mean, instead of going through hundreds of reports and correcting grammar and language, we can ask the students to use the modern tools to help out with that, and we can become more specialized in our domains, and we can serve the public in a different way. So maybe we will have more time to actually meet with professionals who want to come back to academia after 15 years after graduation or 20 years and brush up on their skills, or just meet the professor and talk about the newest development in that field. And maybe now we will have time to do that. And that also means that we probably have to change a bit the way we organize our time at the university and also our resource allocations and our future developments.
So before I round up our discussion, there has been some questions in the chat, and it's about these tools hallucinating or being wrong, as you mentioned also in your presentations. How do we most effectively tackle that?
I think that I think that depending on the level of complexity, it's harder and harder. So, basic facts, that's quite easy to see. Well, as I show the image of evidence, that's easy to spot as problematic or incorrect. But if I were to ask something to the model to produce something that I don't know about, I wouldn't be able to evaluate that and make sure that it's accurate. So right now, at least, maybe, as I said, it may be different from a year from now. But for the moment, the only way I see it is that we can't use them to produce stuff that we don't know anything about, that we're not able to check if it's correct. So we still need knowledge about what we're using it for. The purpose is not to replace us in producing knowledge, but rather to help us with that, like a co-pilot in programming. If it produces code that Miroslav isn't able to check, well, what's the purpose then? So yeah.
So, and thank you so much again for your presentations. And I think that we have had a very good discussion here. But before I leave you, is there any question that you think that I might have forgotten to ask you? Or would like to highlight something?
No, yeah. The only thing I talk about is teachers within higher education and students being able to learn more about this. But we've covered that, so I think that's the most important thing for me at the moment. To be able to use something in a responsible way, from many different perspectives, ethically, for example, you need to understand how it works. That's it. You need to understand why you get the product that you get. What's the reasons behind this, and how does it work? Otherwise, it's hard using them in a responsible way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, we have touched upon it several times, but I think a very important aspect is the aspect of both educating practitioners and students in making choices concerning when and how to involve generative AI, but also expanding the knowledge that we have available within that area, because it's an area that we know far too little about from a research point of view. But also to create relevant methods and tools for making those choices, because they cannot be solely intellectual. We have to provide practical tools for people to be able to do that quickly and efficiently in work. Otherwise, they will just use generative AI when it's not maybe what they would stand behind and do that in a responsible way.
And I think that one of the aspects that I want to leave the audience with is the fact that we have not really discussed the role of professions and universities in the future. When I teach my students programming, I usually tell them in the era of Copilot and ChatGPT, there is no place for bad programmers. Those who are good programmers will be fantastic and excellent. And that, I think, is also the case for the university. If in the era of generative AI and new modern tools, we have to be on the edge. We have to lead the way. We have to teach our students, but we also have to teach ourselves much more, because otherwise it will be less and less relevant. The place for human beings in academia becomes increasingly more important.
And before I let you go, Miroslav, what would be your recommendations for any, maybe a university or any organization who want to start to write an own policy around generative AI? What would be your recommendations?
My recommendation would be not to start by looking at somebody else, but to start from your own operations, to see what you're doing, what is your core value, what do you want to achieve with that policy, and start drafting that policy from that. Not look at what others have developed and where they developed that from, because that is not going to benefit your organization.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great discussions you had here.
Yes, very exciting. I think I learned so much. So I'm going to have some thinking today, actually, around this.
Great, thank you so much. I would like to say a big thank you to the speakers and to you, Raquel, for moderating the discussion. Really interesting to learn more about how generative AI is affecting the higher education and get these insights from Gothenburg University. We are planning to have more of this kind of webinars in the future, so touching how AI is affecting academia and the higher education. So stay tuned. And with that said, I would like to share with you the next slide that is about my AI. is a digital platform developed by AI Sweden. So you're more than welcome to sign up and scan the QR code that you can see on your screen at the moment. There you can find more information about use cases, AI use cases, as well as upcoming webinars, and share your knowledge with our ecosystem. So with that said, we would like to warmly thank you and see you soon.